and I'm going to be recording. So please, if you have any questions that come up through this presentation, put them in the chat, and I'll relay them to Catherine. Or, since it doesn't look like we have an enormous group tonight, we might be able to come off mute if people feel comfortable to do so at the end, and you can ask your question directly. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Director of Outreach for Fusion Academy in Boston. My co-host here tonight, Elizabeth Sorensen, is Director of Outreach for campuses in Connecticut and New York. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker. So Catherine founded Gap Year Solutions to help students successfully transition to college with a customized plan that builds life skills through real-world learning. She's based in the Boston area. She is an accredited Gap Year counselor and a professional member of the IECA, which is the Independent Educational Consultants Association. So with that, Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Wow, it's great to be here. Thanks, Matt and Elizabeth, for having me. I feel like I've traveled all over the country, and every time I travel, I always visit a Fusion. So I can't wait to get on the road again at some point soon. So as Matt said, I am a Gap Year advisor. And for any of you out there who have no idea what a Gap Year advisor is, think of a college counselor. College counselors help students figure out their plan and how to go through the college process. And I actually help students figure out really what a Gap Year is and how to go through the Gap Year process. I'm passionate about Gap Years, and I spend a lot of time speaking and having awareness and spreading the awareness of Gap Years throughout the country. As I said before COVID, I was traveling to college fairs and conferences and libraries all over the country to just help other people, high school counselors, understand what a Gap Year is. So tonight, I hope that you leave this Zoom knowing a little bit more than when you came. Basically, I founded Gap Year Solutions because I really feel like I want to help high school students transition really successfully with the tools they need before they go to college, if that is their next step. As well as being a, hold on, there we go, sorry. As well as being a Gap Year advisor, I'm also the mother of 4 sons. My oldest son actually spent his junior year of high school in Spain. So he lived with the host family. He did all of his classes in Spanish. I don't know how he did that, but he did. It was an amazing experience for him. Then my second son took a Gap Year. And I always smile more when I talk about him because that 1 year made such a difference in his life. He took his Gap Year right before college. On his Gap Year, he did some volunteer work, but he also worked. He had a job because he really wanted to travel. And it was really important for our family for him to really contribute a lot of money for his traveling. He said after the first 3 weeks of working, "Hey, Mom, I had no idea that everyone didn't go to college. I didn't know it was a privilege. I just felt like everyone goes to college." And he learned that on his own. I didn't teach him that. And he ended up by traveling to Cuba. It was on his bucket list. He had studied so much about Cuba in high school. Happened to be when the embargo was lifted years ago. He got back from Cuba after spending 3 months there, and he said, education is really important. And, I feel like he grew, not just physically, but he grew mentally, he matured. And when he stepped on a college campus, he was standing up straighter. He felt more confident. He had certainly more independence. He was more mature. And he will say, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Top of his resume, I could go on and on and talk about him. He is why I get up every day and work with other students with Gap Years. I also have a freshman in college. He's on the left of me. He's 6'6", and I'm actually 5'7", so my kids are huge. He actually is a freshman in college. And you ask, or you might ask, why didn't he take a Gap Year? You can imagine that I really wanted him to take a Gap Year. I actually just wrote a blog about it that I'm not going to go into now, but if you want to read why, he chose not to. And I thought that was, strong of him. Here I am, this is what I do for a living, but he didn't want to do it. He had many reasons why he chose not to take a Gap Year. I also have a junior in high school. So I'm going to be going through that college process yet again. But he has seen what his brothers have done. So as a fourth child, I think he'll make his own decision. But I always want to say that a Gap Year is something that you must choose. So beyond being a gap year advisor, I get kids and I love working with kids. Okay, so tonight I'm just going to give you an overview of what I want to cover. Really, what is a gap year? A very simple definition of a gap year and some of the benefits of taking a gap year. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions that I want to talk about as well. And, with all the amount of, there's so many different activities and experiences that you can have in a gap year. How do you plan a gap year? It can be overwhelming, and I want to go over that tonight as well. And then I'm not sure, I usually ask ahead of time what year students are on the Zoom, but I'll just go over the process of how does that, a gap year relate to the college process. Okay, let's start. What is a gap year? Really simple definition. It's an intentional time off from traditional academic studies. Okay, it can be a semester, it can be a year. There's no set gap year. I have parents and students coming up to me to say, how do I sign up for a gap year? Well, you don't sign up for a gap year. Every single gap year is customized for that particular student. Just like every student's different, every gap year is different. There's many reasons why students are taking a gap year, whether it's they're burned out, they just don't feel ready to go to college. They may have no motivation. They may just need a break, or they may just say, you know what, I think I need to take some time right now. And maybe, their mental health is being challenged. We've seen a lot more of that lately. I think of when I'm in person, I'll say, everyone raise their hand who feels like this. High school students, are you feeling like this? When I think about this slide, it happens to be one of my favorites for tonight. Kids are on this track. If you're a senior on this call tonight, or a senior, or you're a parent of a senior, you will have gone to school for 13 years. It's a lot. And you're on this race. It's almost like the race for some students is their next step. The end of their race is college. And it's really hard to get off this path. It's really hard to take a step off the typical normal path. Everyone just goes to college. It's hard to take a break. It's also hard to understand who you are necessarily. A lot of students are working really hard in high school. They're trying to check all the boxes off. They don't have a lot of time to feel like, who am I? Why am I even going to college? And I think, quite honestly, and we're all seeing this has happened way before COVID, there's a lot more pressure with all the social media we have, with just making sure that you're in competition with other students. It's a challenge. And quite frankly, there's been a national study that's been going on literally since the 1960s, reporting the mental health of students on a college campus. And if you look at this really quickly in the last 20 years, how much that has changed. There is a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of depression on college campuses. Now, when you tour a college campus, for instance, they're going to show you the wellness center. And I'm thrilled that they have a wellness center, but they didn't used to. There's a lot of students that are challenged. And, the goal is to help students get to college campuses when they're ready. And I say to parents and students all the time, you have one chance to be a freshman on a college campus. So when you go, just make sure that you're ready. And that you have all the tools to really navigate that college campus to the best of your ability. I think that we're always thinking that, we're just going to go to college. And I have this slide here tonight. There's 4,000 colleges around the country, colleges, universities. And this is data from them, basically. Out of all those college campuses, this is the average now. Up to 33% of freshmen will not be back after sophomore year. After freshman year. So they're not coming back sophomore year. And out of those students, four-year universities, only 59% of students are ever going to graduate. I'd ask you to unmute yourself, but I won't. What is the average graduation rate in years? It's 6 years. So if you look at this slide, you say, wow, like what's happening? What is happening to our freshmen? What's happening to the college students? And what are we doing to really address this? Why are we pushing students? Why is it the norm? Why can't we just take a break and say, pause? What are we going to do to help these students so when they get there, they're ready and they're going to succeed? And I would say, like, push the pause button. There's no rush. There's no penalty for going to college when you're 19 or 20. And folks just think, you know what, this is just what we're supposed to do. We need to follow the herd. That's what we do. Well, I can tell you in Europe, about 35% of students take a gap year. It's like a rite of passage. Australia, the same way, it's like 90%. So there is, there's no other time in a young adult's life that they will have this year where there's no strings attached, no student loans, no mortgage payments, really this time to figure out who they are, personal growth. And that's what I want to really talk about tonight. There are so many benefits for taking a gap year. I could talk about this all night. I think well-being is right up front there, really like emotionally and physically well-being. There's a lot going on with students right now, and understanding that a lot of students are living in a bubble, and there's a lots of different activities, and there's different world perspectives that students can gain on their gap year before, if their next their next experience is college. Not to say you have to go to college, but their next experience is college, understanding what life is like outside of their bubble. I think it's really important to understand personal health. If students are having help with therapists or doctors or something in their normal high school life, making sure they can cope on their own and feeling good about that on the college campus. Mom or dad is not going to be on a college campus. If we think about it, a lot of kids are in school for, depending on different hours of the day. In college, they're in school about 12 hours a week in a week. So it's a lot of hours. Which leads to life skills. Like, how are students going to figure out how to navigate a college campus? How are students going to really help with time manage? I know myself, I had to get my son out of bed every single morning. I'm like, how is he ever going to show up for time, for his college classes? He's the son that took a gap year, and he does show up for college classes. In a lot of high schools, they don't teach about financial literacy. What about budgeting? What about doing laundry? What about cooking? What about, some students don't have the driver's license? What about those life skills that if you learn them in your gap year, you're way ahead of the game when you get there on a college campus? I think one of my favorite parts about a gap year is really decision-making and problem solving. So when you're in high school, which I think we should be doing, parents and teachers, and whether it's athletic coaches or other experiences that you're having with professionals, they're helping students. That's their job. When you go to college, you need to be able to make your decisions on your own. You need to problem solve. And we expect that kids are going to, do fine in high school, and we're going to plop them on a college campus, and they're going to be able to figure everything out on their own. Well, some kids can, but some kids can't. So learning what it's like to make decisions. When I work with students that are on their gap year, I put the parents in the back seat, the students in the front seat. They're the drivers. They're the drivers of this gap year. They have whatever these students put in, the motivation they put in for this gap year, they'll have an amazing gap year full of purpose and really feeling productive during this year. Authenticity, huge one. Who am I? This is what I call like a discovery year, or who am I year. I like to say when students do get into college, if that's going to be their next choice, they'll wear their sweatshirts around. And I always say, who's the kid under that sweatshirt? Because you're so much more than the name of that college. I want students to understand it's a clean slate. No one knows who this student is on their gap year. It's the coolest thing. They're starting from square one again. And then if the student's going to college, students that go to college are more focused. They're completely more engaged. Colleges love students that take gap years because they know they're just that year older. Their brains have matured a little bit more. They tend to be more leaders on campus. They tend to graduate with a higher GPA. They transfer less, and they graduate within 4 years. And why is that? That because they've maybe done different experiences in their gap year, where they've chosen different ideas, and they might think about, maybe I might major in this, maybe I'll try this experience. So they're just more excited to go. They've taken a year to get fire in their belly, to step on that academic wheel again. So there's just so many different benefits of a gap year. With that said, there are still concerns and questions, lots of questions that parents have and students have about, I don't know, these sound like great benefits, but there are definitely some misconceptions that I want to talk about now. So myth number one, if you leave tonight with anything, it's not too expensive, because anyone can afford a gap year. And I truly mean that. A gap year costs what you can afford. So it can be as little as, some students actually are working on their gap year and they actually help pay for college. Other students' pocketbooks are bigger. It's in any place in between for that. I love, and many of my students actually have a job. I think of this student right here. She never had a job in her life, and she was planning on going to South America. This is pre-COVID, for her gap year. And in between her first semester, I said, "What about getting a job in the morning?" And I remember her mother saying, "Oh, she should be late for every shift." She was late for every single day in high school. Guess what? This student, literally, she's smiling so much there. She said she never missed a shift. Her boss said she was the best employee ever because you know what? She did it for herself. She didn't have to go to work. She didn't show up for school. She basically went because she wanted to do it. She felt like she had a purpose. And when I talked to her at the end of her gap year, she said, "My travel was amazing. But you know what? One of my favorite parts was working at the coffee shop. I got to know people. People knew me. I made amazing friends there. So it's just amazing what that didn't cost anything. She actually made money doing that. Some students just self-fund their travel. A lot of people get a little bit nervous. Oh, we can afford the travel. Well, you can self-fund. And if students actually want to go in a program, a structured program, some of them have scholarships that I suggest that you look into as well. Okay, myth number 2. It's all about travel and adventure. You got to be an outdoorsy kid or else you can't take a gap year. And that's not the case at all. And I specifically have these students here. The student on the upper left, he actually started a sneaker business when he was in high school. So for his gap year, he wanted to see if he could actually get that business off the ground and really expand it and make it into something real. So he moved to New York City. He actually went to a couple of classes at a community college, and his sneaker business is on fire. He literally is growing the sneaker business, and he had the time of his life. Didn't travel, for the first part, he lived at home, and then he went to New York. Example of that wasn't adventurous, outdoorsy. The student down the bottom right, this student chose not to apply to college as a senior. I will suggest students apply, go through that process with other students in your school, but some students aren't applying. This student had no idea what he wanted to do. So in his gap year, he took a class, he took an EMT class. He graduated, he actually got a job as an EMT, but in the midst of that, he decided, you know what? I know what I want to do now. I want to go to nursing school. So he applied to 5 nursing schools. He got into every single one, and he was able to work part-time to help pay for his nursing school. So this kid is like over the moon. He said he never, ever would have figured this out if he went right to college. So there's lots of different examples, and you basically, the sky's the limit with a gap year. There's no right or wrong experience that you can have. I don't know if there's any students on the line. I hope there are, but I'm sure you know what FOMO is. My own kids thought I was pretty cool, putting FOMO up there. It's true. It's real. Fear of missing out is real for students, and we have to understand that. But a couple things. Gap years have become so much more popular that, for instance, when my son went on a college campus, he said that people were like envious of him. Hey, dude, I wish that I had done that. How'd you figure that out? He was just explaining what he did, his experience. He was more mature than other kids. He felt like he had more confidence than maybe some other kids. I always say when I work with students, I have their gap year plan figured out and started maybe a few days before their college friends go off to college. So they have their eye on what they're doing. They're engaged in their experience. They don't have to worry about, oh, I wish I wasn't, I'm staying home and I don't know what I'm doing. My friends are all going off to college. They will get immersed in their gap year. Again, I will say this all night long. There has to be a plan, and plans change. So you can change your plan, but there needs to be a plan. And seriously, I've never had a student, I've never interviewed a student, I've never worked with any students that said, oh, you know what, biggest regret of my life, I wish I never did it. Always the opposite. And I mean it, always. It's always been the best decision they've ever made. I always talk about my son. My son basically said, he can't imagine him not doing it. It's at the top of his resume. He's now a senior in college. And when he has all these interviews right now, the first thing his interviewers are asking him, what'd you do in your gap year? So it's just a part of his life now. He's just proud of it. And all that really requires for students is to have courage to take a step off that typical path of following the herd and going right to college. I also think if you, as an 18-year-old, can say, you know what, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to figure out who I am and why I'm going to college, if I'm going to college, or what my next step is. If you can do that when you're 18, you have the ability to do that when you're 22, when you're 32. You can start understanding that you can make your own path in life, right? Not just when you're 18. And finally, myth number 4, you know what? I'm not just that gap year kid. That's not me. I purposely put all these faces up here. Every single one of these students are past students of mine, and they're all different. Every single one of them is different. Anyone can take a gap year. Getting out of your comfort zone is really, really important. I'll have students that say, oh, I just want to work on my art all year. And I'll be like, well, what about trying something a little bit different? Some students will say, I'll figure out my gap year in September, have my summer with my college friends. I want to hang out, sleeping in, playing video games. That's not a gap year, that's a vacation. So understanding that, having this plan and working at it, it's not, sometimes it's easier when you think about it, just to go to college. It's just easier. And that's why a lot of people maybe not think so seriously about a gap year. In my mind, my goal is to say, everyone could benefit from a gap year. It's just choose to take one or choose not to, but don't consider it. I think that's where a lot of people are just lacking that idea. So what can you do during a gap year? Again, sky's the limit, but I have this in basically some little buckets here, like work and internships, service and volunteer, language and cultural immersion, travel and adventure, farming, marine life, wildlife, arts, music, and dance, and many, many more. And as you can imagine, in each one of these buckets, there's hundreds of different opportunities here. So I just threw up some slides here of just some students that had some fun experiences, and there's just so many more that I just wanted to share just a few of these. For you all folks that don't know really what a gap year structured program is, I'll explain that briefly now. A gap year program was structured for 18 to really 22-year-olds, purposely for this age group. So it's not summer camp and it's not study abroad, meaning you're not going to have your hand held the whole time in summer camp. And study abroad are for students in college that, they're 20 years old, they've lived alone, they've navigated a college campus. This is more for students that want to stay with their peers. They want to have an experience with other people, meaning their own, 18 to 22-year-olds. And these are mostly travel programs, right? A lot of students have never traveled alone without their parents. So they're teaching these students, there's 2 leaders, usually 10 to 14 students on these programs. They're learning how to travel. They're learning how to travel with safety and risk management, about visas and passports, how to navigate an airport, cultural immersion, currency, everything that you would need to learn to travel. I remember my own son had said, I'm just going to go backpack around Europe. And I said, no, you're not. You have no idea how to travel. You're going to, I think doing a structured program would be really important, which is what he ended up by doing. So that's one type of travel. Because of COVID, a lot of these programs actually pivoted to the United States, which I'm so excited about. For years, I've said, how come there's not more structured gap year programs in the US? Well, now we have them. And they've been so successful that we still are keeping them in the US, which is amazing. So some are in Hawaii and all over the country. So it's been a really nice thing for our students from all over the country to understand the beauty of our own country and the different cultures that we have. Another type of travel is a little bit more dependent. So other types of programs will set up accommodations. They'll set up, there'll be some person on site that will be your contact 24/7 if there's any health issues or any emergencies. But there'll be like service work or some volunteer work in, let's say, a different country. Right now, that student in the top right there, she was trying to decide whether she wanted to be a vet for after college. So she actually worked at a baboon and monkey sanctuary in South Africa. And she just had a heyday. If you look at her, she was in heaven. And she's now going to be going to vet school. There's other opportunities of interning within the medical field, as you can see. And other students, there's always students that are working for their political campaigns. I have students that start their own companies. There's lots of art projects and art programs. As you can see, some of these other structure programs, there was, a program that's in Rome. There's one in Costa Rica, learning a different language, living with host families. It's a great way to learn a language, teaching English. I can go on and on. So there's no limitations here. Just the desire, what interest the student has. And if they don't know, we're dreaming. We figure this out. Internships have been really a really cool thing for students. And we've all heard of internships. In the olden days, it was in college, you would get an internship as a junior, and then maybe you'd be offered a job as a senior. internships are really so important now. In the past, I actually had students learn to network. They don't teach networking in high school, right? Talk to your parents, talk to your neighbors, talk to your relatives, friends from different parts of the country, figure out if you can get an internship. I just got an internship for this student, which is the picture here. He's actually working remotely at a cardiology office in New York City. He's loving it. He wants to be pre-med in college. So he's doing lots of data entry. He's doing a lot of analytics. He's learning about the cardiologist. It's just been amazing. So, I've started helping students find different internships all over the country. And the cool thing is most of them are actually virtual still. So the idea of an internship is such a great way for students to dip their toes into a field that they may never have thought about before. Gap years are a time for kids to learn what they think they like and what they don't like. So another reason why they're more productive in college is someone thinking that, oh, I definitely want to go into banking, and then has an internship in banking thinking, maybe not. They're not going to focus their whole college experience. Therefore, they don't have to change their majors as many times. They're going to focus a little bit more. So dipping your toes into different careers during your gap year has been super helpful, and kids are loving it. Okay, so how do we figure out how do you plan this gap year? And when I work with students, I think of the gap year like a college year. First semester, a few experiences, home for the holidays, meaning even if you are home, just taking a break. Enjoy the holidays with your family, see your college friends that went to college, and then second semester, different experiences. So it's not so overwhelming when you think about, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How many things should I be doing? It's again, very individual and customized, but that's how I like to think about it with students. So if you want to look at a couple of these experiences here, there was a student, he worked as a lifeguard. He worked as a lifeguard to get some money. Then he did something called woofing, which is a really affordable way to see another part of our country or another part of the world, which is you work in a farm 4 to 5 hours a day, weekends off, and you get free room and board. So this student did this. He worked at a maple syrup farm in Western Mass. He liked it so much that his second semester, he went out and worked at a winery in California. The second student here, he actually worked for a political campaign the entire fall. It was one of his dreams to do that. So he worked full-time for a campaign. And then after that, during the Christmas time, he worked at Starbucks, which is something that he said, boy, I had no idea that was going to be such a hard job, but he actually loved it. He got some change. And he said, I also he also taught skiing. And he said, you know what? The cool part is I had some downtime and I was able to finally read a book that I got to choose. He said all through high school, I never had time at all to pick up a book that I wanted to read versus what the high school was telling me to read. He said he also picked up photography. He loved that. And in the spring, he hiked the Appalachian Trail. He used the money that he made from teaching skiing and at Starbucks to pay for his accommodations and food when he was hiking. So if you think of all those experiences that kid had, he was a different human when he stepped on a college campus, and it didn't cost anything. So as far as travel right now, there's definitely travel that's happening. Obviously, it was very limited last year during COVID. However, there were still programs. There were programs in Israel that were still traveling last year, believe it or not, and Ireland never shut down. Right now, Israel is it's generally open. They're very strict. Some countries are very strict with what their policies are with COVID, but it's changing literally weekly. What's happening with other countries? Central America, Costa Rica is open. Thailand's open. Ireland's open. But lots of parts of Europe are open right now. You see the big X there with New Zealand and Australia. So many kids in their gap year. Actually, that's like the hot spot for some kids. That's not going to open for a while. And, and there's just many other countries that are starting to open up. The thing that's been amazing, I've been so happy, the resilience of these students. When I work with them now, I have a plan A and a plan B. If something happens and the country that you wanted to go to is not going to, take US students, let's have a plan B. So when you create your gap year plan, try to have, 2 different plans just in case something happens. Again, there's lots of US programs, but if some kids want to get away, there's a lot of options that are starting to open up now for travel outside the US. So how do you plan? How do you deal with your gap year plan along with the college planning process? So I don't know if your seniors on the line tonight, but right now and through September through January, you're going to be working on your college applications and submit those. December through March, you're going to be getting your decisions, whether you get in early, whether you apply early or not. January through May, you're going to be getting your offers. And then May 1st, other than the COVID year, is really when you have to make your decision whether you're going to be taking a gap year or not. I mean, I'm sorry, which college you're going to be going to or not. And how does that work with the gap year planning process? I basically say, I hope we have freshmen on the line tonight. You can always think about a gap year, and you don't have to wait till the senior year to think about it, and dream big and understand that this is something I might want to consider. You don't have to do it, but really consider it. Senior year, I basically say to students, work on your college applications for this first semester, get those the best you can possibly do. You can still be thinking about your gap year, but you don't have to purposely sit down and really sit down hard and plan it. Once you get your applications in, you really need to start the planning process, whether it's, if you do happen to want to do a structured program, then I would say like really starting in the new year, once your applications are in, to start thinking about which program. And they have filled up a little earlier this year just because there's more kids than ever taking gap years, and the number of gap year programs hasn't increased that much. But in general, you'll be deferring your college admissions either May or June. And again, every single college is different. So every single college, once you defer, you have to call them up. And I'll talk about the deferral process in a minute. So May through August, you'll really be finalizing your gap year. And I say gap year, again, it could be just a semester, but thinking about your plan for spring, I think, is really important. Your mind might change, and you might be doing something in the fall and just change your idea for the spring, but knowing that you sort of have a plan created, it makes it much easier. And September, again, I say a few days before college starts, start your gap year. And as far as the deferral process, I think I don't want to spend too much time on this right now, but deferral process, every college is completely different. Once you understand their policy, whether it's just a quick email, they usually want to know what your plans are. Again, every college is a little bit different. But there is this, whether it's June 1st or July 1st, there is a set time that you actually have to basically say, I am taking a gap year. Some colleges let you take some college credits, which is another great thing to do in a gap year. My son did that. He took a program, and he was able to take 2 different college credits to put towards gen eds when he was in college. So it was a great way to be able to take different classes in college. Some colleges don't accept college credits on your gap year. But in general, colleges, as I said before, they love gap year kids because they know the retention is going to be there. They're going to stay when they get there. And they're a little bit more mature. So I don't need to spend too much more time on that process right now. A question, I put this slide in because I get this asked all the time. What does a gap year advisor really do? I answer a lot of questions, and I basically work closely with a student. This is their year. What are their desires? What are their interests? Dream big. I always have them make a list of all their dreams and how much can we get done in a year logistically and without too many things on their plate. I really help them plan this year out. And do they want to do programs? Do they want to have a job? Do they want to get an internship? Really working and really customizing their plans. I think of students as like a puzzle. When they come to me, I have no idea who they're going to be and what they're going to want to do, but putting the pieces of the puzzle together is just fascinating to see what the student is in, when I meet them, either junior year or senior year, and at the end of their gap year, it's like a different person. I spent a lot of time vetting programs. You can Google gap years. There's 1,000 programs out there. There's a lot of information, which is amazing. But some programs, their websites look great, and maybe they're not the greatest programs. So I spent a lot of time going to site visits, actually putting my foot on land to see how these programs are running. The leaders, the directors. I pretty much know most of the directors on a personal level, so I can reach out to them with issues with students and attach, I direct the students with the directors and their parents. And honestly, one of my students said this years ago, you're like my mentor, my coach. And I guess that's what I am. I am a parent. I totally get these kids, but I'm not the student's parent. So it's really worked out really well. So that's it. I hope I didn't talk too fast or too much. Here's my information. I'm happy to, at any point at all, to have anyone reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy. I love gap years, and they're just something I hope everyone considers. Again, you don't have to take a gap year, but I think the idea of putting this on the plate of I think of if the college is your next choice, you've spent so much time finding the right fit college, visiting, going to campus tours, what part of the country. And then if it's the right time, it's going to be a great fit. If you go to college with the right college, the right fit college at the right time, when you feel like you're really ready and you really can, get fire in your belly to do this, that's the most successful student on a college campus for sure. Okay. So now, Matt, I hope I have 1,000 questions.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much. That was amazing. I'm gonna see if Fusion Academy will let me defer my enrollment. I mean, my so I can go take a gap year. I have a couple questions queued up, but yeah, just a reminder, if you want me to ask any, put them in the chat and I'll get them over to Catherine. So the first one is, do learning different are learning differences a limitation for the travel-based gap year?
No. What I say to students that have learning differences is be incredibly transparent. If you're thinking of a travel program, travel programs, they work with students with ADD, lots of different issues, whether it's eating disorders, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression. I mean, they're okay. The issue with students with any sort of disability is or health issue, the student has to be able to manage their own health issue. And I think if that answers your question. So there are lots of there's interviews that these programs will have with students. If there's a therapist involved, the company will actually speak with the therapist to make sure the student is the right fit for the program. The student needs to be the right fit, just like the program needs to be the right fit for the student. So transparency is really key, but there's students, if they can administer their own medication and feeling confident, with their ability to cope and have coping, abilities and mechanisms that they can choose on their trip, then there's no problem. Again, it's all about transparency.
Thank you for that answer. Could you please walk us through a sample program, how it's structured and how it's monitored?
Okay, sample program. Okay. So, sample program. Let me think of a program. Normally the program, first of all, the application process, we'll start with that. The student fills out the application. The student will then have an interview with the director of the program or the outreach director. And before the student ends up by going in the program, if they're accepted into the program, they will actually have a pre-departure. Whether it's in the United States or whether it's abroad. Obviously abroad, there's going to be the visas that need to be figured out, the passports, they're going to walk the families through all of that. Insurance is important. A lot of companies will basically require, other than just medical insurance, evacuation insurance. So all of those aspects, the companies are equipped to help families do that. There's a lot of situations where, well, look at COVID. Like these students had to fly home immediately when COVID hit a year ago. The programs are equipped to do that. Every single program has a different niche. Some of the programs, as you can imagine, they're outdoorsy, they're trekking, they're hiking, they're canoeing, they're mountain climbing. Other programs are in the arts world, and they're doing a different medium of art each week with a professional coming in teaching them charcoal or watercolors. Accommodations are very different. Some are home-based, meaning the student will actually live in a home with other students. Some are in host families. Some are in dormitories. Some are in hostels. Some are in tents. Some are in tentaloos. So, as far as the actual, the day, like they'll be living in a different situation, could be multiple times, and traveling to different countries. The food is always included. Most programs have 2 leaders or maybe 3 leaders. Those leaders are the peers of these students. Yes, they are the leaders, but they really have done a great job with relating to these young adults. The leaders are usually in their mid to late 20s. They have had a lot of experience. They've had a lot of training to become a leader for these students. So they're responsible for the itinerary. They're responsible for health, risk management. A lot of programs are accredited, meaning they've gone through a really rigorous protocol of, I'm on their standards and accreditation committee. So there's about 85 different standards that some programs have to go through to become accredited. So, there's no set, this would be a typical day in a program. Every single program is completely different. It's really what the niche of the program is, if that makes sense. Sometimes, like, for instance, there's a program in Hawaii and maybe they're surfing, they're learning how to surf for a day. And then they're doing most of them have service work involved, which I think is terrific, whether they're working on a farm or they're helping students with English, depending on where they are. So it's hard to sort of say what's a typical day and how do you work through a program, because they're all really completely different.
Right. Thank you. Um, what is the range of cost for gap year coaching?
Gap year coaching or gap year programs?
I would say for gap year coaching. So I guess it would be a question of, working with someone like you, you know.
If anyone really wants that question, it would probably be best to reach out to me.
Um, good point made in here in the chat. The University of California and the state of California does not allow gap years. Um, you have you have to reapply, and there's no guarantees of admission again. And in relation to that, there's an individual on this call that had a student at UMass who, really wanted to take a gap year, and it seemed like UMass was really kind of making it difficult for that student to do so. Do you have any other sort of tips on how to deal with a university that is making it tough to take a gap year?
That's a really good question. And UC schools will not take gap years, although there have been some students that have written letters and worked really, really hard and have been able to finagle a way to do that. I don't suggest it for UC schools. They had 140,000 applications last year. They have no time for gap years. UMass Amherst will take gap year students, and it's a matter of speaking to the head of the admissions, student affairs, having your plan all figured out. Basically pursuing, I guess, would be the best way to deal with UMass, because I know for a fact that they will take gap year students. They may not announce it or put it on their website, but they have in the past. I don't have any students currently going to UMass that are on a gap year, but it's basically having the student do all the legwork. Colleges don't want to hear from parents anymore. They want the students to be making the phone calls, the students to be emailing the admissions office, and just really asking, saying, this is really going to make me a better student. Having that letter or that email be a really strong why they want to do it, why they will be a better student, when they get back to UMass or whatever other university that is. Why is it so important for them to do? So it's really pursuing that as their goal, and I think that they can get that through. I spent a lot of time helping with deferral letters as well. I mean, that's something that I do with students. So
sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, it's okay.
So what if you change so much within your gap year that you no longer want to go to the college you deferred from?
It happens. Usually if that happens, the student will apply again in the fall. They'll know after the first few months, like, you know what, I got the wrong school. By the way, a lot of students, especially this past year, took a gap year because they didn't get into a school. So there's no reason to go to a school that they chose that they wanted, right? So there's no reason to spend thousands of dollars on a school that you have no interest in going. So the first part of your gap year, now there's two things you can do here. You can either, you can figure this out by the time it's October, November, and still get your applications in by January or December 31st. Students do that as well. Otherwise, you'd have to wait do a spring enrollment the following year, or just take another year. Most kids don't take 2 years as a gap year, so it does happen. But kids have figured this out and they've reapplied in the fall of their gap year.
Have you found that it's more challenging? So I'm thinking of the example you used with the young man who decided to get certified as an EMT, and he didn't apply to any colleges. Have you found that it's more challenging for students to apply for college like within their gap year as opposed to their junior or senior year of high school?
I do think it's harder. And what I always say to students is go through that process when you're a senior. Even if you don't push go at the end, go through, you need to get your teacher recommendations. you need to get your counselor, your high school guidance counselor's recommendation. But, if you've gone through the process, when you do it again, or if you actually push go, this kid, and I have to say the percentage is going up. It used to be like 3% of students would do that. The percentage is definitely going up of, I don't even know what I want to do. Like, how would I possibly apply to college without knowing? So it's not impossible at all. And actually, in many ways, I've had students that were too stressed out as a senior to even write those applications, to write a really good essay. So they said, I just want to take the summer. I don't want to be stressed. I want to just do this at my own time. They come up with fantastic essays. Their Common Apps are amazing. And they're choosing to do that in their gap year, making sure that they're at a place where they have Wi-Fi. They can push go if they happen to be traveling. Gap year programs, for instance, are very aware that a lot of school students may be doing that. So they make sure that they have availability for, wherever they happen to be, that there's Wi-Fi to push go for their applications. It's not impossible, and it's becoming more normal.
Great. And Rob, I'm glad that you asked this follow-up question, because I wanted to return to your original question as well. And Catherine, this was the question of the example of a program. And I think what this attendee wanted to hear was an example of one of your programs. What have you coordinated? What's a sample of something that you've helped coordinated for a student? And there is a reflection back on the young man who ran his shoe business. Was that self-directed? Was that with the help of you? Was it with the help of another kind of overarching program? And how did the program help, if there was one?
Yeah, so my program, all the examples that I've talked about are my own students that I've helped. So the student, woofing, or the student, I work with students all over the country, so I direct them. I can't find the pizza shop that they're going to get a job at, but I'll work with them to say, okay, let's figure this out. How are you going to get a job? They walk them from step 1 to step 5 about getting a job, follow up, emails, interviewing. I help students with resumes. I basically am that person that can help structure their gap year. The student that, for instance, that wanted to work with his sneakers, that was his little company in high school. I don't normally help find residents, but when I happen to know places, I will help him. So I happen to know of accommodations for him in New York City. And he wanted to go to community college, so I helped him find a community college in New York that worked. I helped him figure out classes. So I helped him structure, and then I was there with him to be that accountable person. So when he'd have an interview for a job, he would contact me, and I would help him follow up with the job, for instance. I have a student right now that actually all she wanted to do was dance. And so she got into a college. She wasn't sure if she wanted to do major in dance, minor in dance. She knew she didn't actually want to be a dancer after college. She wanted to be in the dance world. So she was able to find a location where she worked at a dance studio. She interned and she mentored this woman. How do you start a company? How do you start a dance studio? And then she started teaching there. So I helped her throughout that whole process. So my examples are literally, when a student comes to me, what do they want to do? How can I help them structure, whether it's a travel program, whether it's some sort of independent travel, and basically if they want a job or an internship, I could help them with that process as well. So every single student's different, but I help them structure their year from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and I think like a beautiful display of that is the in my notes I noted it as the honeycomb image in the slideshow. I don't know if you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
It's the one with the different buckets.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of a beautiful example of kind of how you structure a program. Pulling from the different areas that the student might want to address over a semester or over a year. So I really like that.
Well, I also think that some students want to just do their one subject like that, they just want to focus on what they want, but there's so many options that are out of their comfort zone, that if they just try something different. I mean, I think of the student that had that job. She literally still talks about that job because it just changed her. She had no idea that working, she would have met so many cool people and feeling so good about herself. And to me, this gap year is about personal growth. I want the kids to do great things and their interests and it's their goals. It's not what the parents want them to do. It's what they want to do. And when they get to choose, finally, they get to make the decision of what they want to do. That is priceless. These kids feel confident and they feel powerful. They finally have a purpose. So I think it's all about letting them grow up, letting them, have little mistakes here and there. But if college is their next, step, they've gained so much knowledge about living, about adulting in this gap year. So when they get to college, they just have the basics already figured out. And I think it's so relevant for so many kids.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And, we have a few minutes left. So if there's anyone that feels comfortable in doing so and wants to come off Zoom to ask a follow-up question or a clarifying question or an entirely new question, feel free.
Hi, sorry, I missed the earlier part. I got delayed at work. Is it going to be possible to get the slides afterwards? So that I can take a look and not bore people with things you've already gone over?
Yes, I recorded. So
Mhm.
I note the recording following as well.
Great. Can I actually ask a question you probably already covered, but what does it tend to be, do people tend to do more gap half year or gap year? Or what's the kind of breakdown that you see?
The majority are gap years.
They are full year. Okay.
I would say during COVID, there's a lot more gap semesters. I worked with a lot of students that were in college that decided they didn't want to go back to online learning. So a lot more students in college age actually took gap years last year. There's something called Feb starts, like Middlebury starts in the middle of February. Some colleges will have I call it like a forced gap semester. They actually admit the students for January admit. So those are gap semesters. In general, students certainly from high school take a gap year.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So, any final thoughts, Catherine? Feel free to add any. Liz, if you're still there, feel free. You can say anything as well. Yeah.
I'm here. Thank you so much, Catherine.
You're so welcome. I feel like getting people aware, understanding the misconceptions of a gap year, and I think listening to your student, if you're a parent, and listening to what they feel, what they want to do, if you feel like they're ready, if they feel like they're ready, I think it's listening, I think is really important for this age group. And it's just a little blip in their lives when they're 18, but it can make the world of difference. And seeing it firsthand with my own son is why I get up every day and do this, because it was life-changing for him. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, it was great. And thank you for everyone who joined. You can be expecting an email from me. It'll include Catherine's contact information as well as the recording. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.